Thank you so much, Kit Kennedy, for that beautiful introduction. It's wonderful to be here with Richard Kauffman, New York's former energy czar. And with everything going on, people might forget that we have a climate crisis as well as a health crisis, and unfortunately, an economic crisis as well. That being said, we're lucky that New York passed an aggressive nation-leading law in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And Richard, I thought that we could start there. The CLCPA, as the cool kids call it, sets nation-leading clean energy mandates for New York. And I'm wondering if you have any advice, not only for the state's policymakers, but also for stakeholders as they seek to create roadmaps to implement the goals.
Well, thanks, Susan, and thank you, Kit. Well, it's true that the state has a terrific law in the CLCPA, and thanks to the governor and the legislature for enacting it. I'm not sure that my former colleagues would like my advice, but since you've asked, I can't help myself. I guess a few things. I mean, I think the first is to keep the regulatory pressure on the ways to build the smart grid, because the current grid was never designed for renewable resources or for distributed resources like solar and batteries. And we're just not going to get to where we need to get to by bolting on resources onto the grid that were never designed for those kind of resources. And by doing that, if we just keep doing that, we're going to really increase inequality, because lower income people pay more of their percentage of their incomes on energy. And we won't be able to electrify transportation or heating as much as we do with a clunky grid that we've got. So the good news is the current grid is not only energy inefficient, it's also really financially inefficient. And we can really get more out of what we already pay for electricity to help fund this new grid. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is we've got to get the balance right between mandates and markets. Mandates are obviously great because it gives a clear direction to stakeholders. But we didn't build the new telecom system by government determining how many routers or switches we needed to have. We created a policy level which had broad principles and let market forces allocate capital and bring in innovation. And I think the third thing is we need to recognize that technology is changing, and we need to be open about possibilities. There's a lot of work going on hydrogen and capturing CO2 and reusing it. I mean, and even next generation nuclear power. So that doesn't mean we wait for a silver bullet, but it means we have to be focused on what we want to achieve, which is reducing emissions, not on specific technologies. And I guess the last thing, because you mentioned stakeholders, is that obviously achieving the objectives of CLCPA involves lots of trade-offs. Nothing's going to be perfect. And government moves a lot faster when stakeholders can get together and try to find common ground and then come to government, as opposed to just presenting everything to government and trying to have government just try to mediate amongst very different perspectives.
So all of that said, what do you consider to be the greatest opportunities as well as the greatest challenges for growing this industry within the framework of the CLCPA?
Well, I think in terms of the renewable industry, we're going to need all the renewable resources that we can get, and happily, New York has got lots of resources. I think in terms of renewables, probably the biggest obstacle is continuing to try to get community support, particularly for onshore resources, but even offshore. We have a tremendous offshore wind resources, but we have to get communities to recognize and appreciate the benefits of these resources, and that's because there is often community opposition, and so this is another one of these trade-offs. We can't have a clean energy economy without having resources in the state.
So you referenced this before, but what do we do to make sure that New York meets its climate goals in an affordable and equitable way? And I guess in terms of equity, I mean, not just for low-income people, but for, those onshore resources, making sure that home rule isn't completely, discounted?
Well, there's a lot in that question. I guess the first point about equity is that again, I want to focus on the financial inefficiency of the current grid, and that's why we really need to get more out of what we already spend, as opposed to just keep bolting on resources. I think we need to also recognize, in terms of equity, how many communities have fossil fuel plants in them, which leads to poor health outcomes. And also, lower income people live in homes which are not only uncomfortable, but also unhealthy and energy inefficient. And so a clear part of the policies which have been in place are focused on trying to retrofit many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of homes, because we are not going to be able to achieve our climate objectives without low to moderate income households. It's just simply, the numbers don't work. So it has to be central to our policy.
So this is sort of a, riffing on that, but we're living in a time of tremendous change and challenge. How has COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement changed the energy and public utility landscape?
Well, I'd like to believe that we were already focused on questions of equity long before Black Lives Matter, and I don't mean to say we've gotten everything figured out, but the CLCPA really grew out of a bottoms-up perspective that we needed to be more equitable and more. There's a word community in that in the title of the bill. So we have developed policies in the state over a period of years now that have been focused on equity, inclusion, and community solar and all kinds of things. And that's, again, not to say that we don't have to do a lot more. But I think the second thing that the virus has highlighted is it really gives a preview of what's going to happen with climate when we really recognize how serious it is suddenly amongst all stakeholders, and the dramatic change that's going to need to take place. So that's, I think, the thing that I've taken away from the virus is that we're going to be seeing dramatic changes in the economy, dramatic changes in behavior, and dramatic change in government once we really recognize that we need to rapidly act on climate change, which I'm happy to say New York has begun to do.
Right.
New York is unfortunately not the entire country.
So what are the three asks that you would make of the federal government? If you had three wishes, what would they be, Richard?
Well, I guess, can I wish for more than three, right? I guess three things. I think the first thing is the cost of carbon. The second thing is an elimination of fossil fuel subsidies. And I think the third is a clean energy standard. We have a standard in New York State, which leads the country, and the federal government can model what New York State has done.
So we only have a minute, and so my last question is this: as you look toward the future in 2050, which, at that point we should have achieved carbon neutrality, what will New York look like to future generations?
Well, I think that what we already see the outlines of what it could look like, because it will not only be a place where it will have cleaner air. People will have more control over their energy. We will have more economic development in New York State. Clean energy jobs have been one of the fastest growing sectors of the economy. So, and then I think the third thing or fourth thing is that I think we're at a time where we're going to get a lot more value out of the energy that we produce. So electricity initially was just about lighting, but obviously we use electricity for a lot more than lighting now. And I think we're at the same point, or could be at the same point, where and I don't know if that's in mobility and the ability to have more autonomous vehicles, which will make transportation easier. I don't know if it's going to be home healthcare, which would make healthcare better, or home entertainment. But the ability to have more distributed energy solutions around us, a smarter grid, will give us, I think, not only a cleaner economy and with more economic development, but also more things that are going to make our lives better. And I don't think we have to wait until 2050.
So it's been a pleasure sharing the screen with you and an honor, Richard Kauffman. Thank you so much.
Well, Susan, thank you.
And I want to say, I hope you enjoy the rest of the program if you're watching. And thank you so much for having us.